A cryptic message on a mirror, a pregnant woman discovered dead, and 5 couples with secrets they believed would never be revealed. What transpired at the Blackwood Hotel that evening? One must first comprehend the individuals who traversed the shadowed corridors of the Blackwood Hotel that evening in order to comprehend the events that transpired in room 237. 5 couples, each of whom harbored secrets they hoped would never be disclosed. They had arrived at the hotel for distinct purposes. However, their fates would soon be interwoven by the same chilling thread: Claire Mercer's death. Initially, there were the affluent socialites, Victoria and Daniel Prescott. Their marriage was the type that appeared flawless from the outside: luxurious vacations, dazzling parties, and the most exquisite clothing. However, fractures had begun to emerge beneath the polished surface. For years, rumors of infidelity had been circulating around them, with each scandal being more humiliating than the previous one. Claire had encountered the Prescotts on numerous occasions, her name infiltrating their social circles like an unwelcome whisper, and her presence a constant, silent threat. Then there were the power-hungry business companions, Mark and Jennifer Hayes. They embodied the ideal of success, as they were always 2 steps ahead, dedicated and ambitious. However, their financial empire was in a state of disarray, despite the polished presentations and forced smiles. They were in a precarious position as a result of a series of unsuccessful ventures, hazardous investments, and poor decisions. Claire Mercer, a trusted employee who had witnessed and learned an excessive amount, had previously worked for them. She had served as their eyes and hearing as their world began to unravel. She had executed contracts, transferred funds, and disclosed confidential information to their adversaries. A constant gnawing fear was the thought of what she might disclose if she was pushed too far. Then there were the childhood companions, Alice and Robert Dawson. Since their school days, they had known Claire, a time when secrets were small and betrayal was a word murmured on playgrounds. However, their trajectories had diverged as they aged, and their bond was weakened by unspoken resentments. In the past, Alice had confided in Claire about her most profound anxieties, and Robert had sought her support during his most difficult periods. However, individuals undergo transformations over time, and trust is exceedingly challenging to restore once it has been compromised. Claire had become a ghost in their lives, a reminder of the weighty weight of regret, the paths taken, and the choices made. Subsequently, the covert lovers, David Lee and Mia Thompson. They had arrived at the Blackwood Hotel separately, taking care to avoid each other's gaze in public and being circumspect in their every move. Their affair was no longer the impassioned, whispered secret it had been in the past. Their lives had become entangled in ways they had never envisaged, as the situation had become messy and complicated. Claire had come into contact with both of them, albeit on separate occasions. Each encounter was a thread in the intricate web she had constructed about herself. They had taken risks in order to be together, risks that now posed a threat to the meticulously crafted lives they had built. Then, the apparently flawless couple, Emily and James Foster. They were the type of couple that people admired, consistently smiling, always together, and seemingly untouched by the gloom that afflicted others. However, those who were intimately acquainted with them observed the indicators: the firm grasp Emily's hand had on James's arm at social gatherings, the manner in which her gaze followed him, and the slight tremor in his voice when he discussed the future. They also harbored secrets that posed a threat to their relationship, secrets that Claire was intimately aware of. Claire Mercer had emerged from humble origins, establishing a life in which connections were frequently more significant than character. She was renowned for her acute intuition, which enabled her to uncover the concealed truths beneath the refined exteriors of those around her. She had been surrounded by friends for a time, but in her final days, her world had become smaller. Her confidence had been replaced by wary glances, as if she perceived the shadows closing in. Finally, there was Detective Alexandra Rhodes, who was responsible for solving the enigma surrounding Claire's death. Rhodes was no stranger to the eerie corridors and the muttered secrets. She had spent years chasing shadows, her mind haunted by cases that refused to close and voices that never completely faded. The case of Claire Mercer would compel her to confront the ghosts of her own past, as well as the secrets of others, thereby dragging her into a familiar abyss. 5 couples. 1 deceased woman. Additionally, there is a hotel that is brimming with muttered secrets. Although it would be some time before anyone dared to utter it aloud, the truth about what happened in room 237 began to take shape as the night deepened and the shadows grew longer. The initial indications of something unsettling began to emerge as the investigation into Claire Mercer's murder commenced. The rapidity with which the questions accumulated and the answers appeared to evaporate, as if water were evaporating through their fingertips, was beyond anyone's comprehension. The Blackwood Hotel, an opulent structure, was situated at the epicenter of the chaos. However, its walls seemed to harbor secrets that were intended to remain concealed. Nearly immediately, the security footage, or, more precisely, its absence, became apparent. On the night of the murder, the hotel's security system, which had been functioning flawlessly for years, abruptly malfunctioned. The cameras in the hallways encircling room 237 were turned off at precisely midnight. 17 minutes. Just enough time for any occurrence. It was only long enough to leave everyone in a state of confusion regarding the true events that transpired during those priceless moments. How could such an event occur in a location that is meticulously monitored and well maintained? Was it a mere coincidence, or was there an individual responsible? In the interim, the hotel's telephone lines began to exhibit unusual behavior. During the night shift, employees reported hearing murmuring over the intercom. The voices were too low to be audible, but they were distinct enough to send a chill down their spines. The murmurs appeared to become more urgent at midnight, but no one was able to identify the source of the calls. This was akin to the building itself being alive with secrets, communicating in a manner that was only comprehended by it. Another distressing detail emerged as the hours passed. Bloodstains were discovered on costly apparel. Mark Hayes, one of the business partners, had arrived that afternoon in a spotless suit. His shirt was marked with deep red, unmistakable stains by the time he was interrogated. He made an attempt to rationalize the situation by claiming that it was inconsequential, perhaps a minor accident. However, the stains did not correlate. They were excessively numerous for a straightforward mishap. Jennifer, his companion, appeared to concur with him. However, she faltered when requested to provide an explanation. It was the type of minor detail that appeared to be amiss, as if it were concealed beneath the surface, awaiting discovery. Then, the witness statements, one after another, began to raise more questions than they answered. The hotel personnel, who were the first to respond when Claire's body was discovered, all claimed to have seen her earlier that night, after she was supposed to have died. Claire was observed walking down the hallway at approximately 10 o'clock in the evening by a bellhop, a chambermaid, and even the front desk attendant. They reported that she appeared to be in good health. No signs of distress, no bleeding. She even smiled as she passed them. However, Claire's body was discovered deceased at midnight, with her body already chilled and arranged in a disquieting manner. How could she have remained alive for hours following the alleged time of her death? But perhaps the most unsettling discovery was made when investigators focused on the mirror in room 237. A message was present, scrawled across the glass in a vibrant red lipstick. The writing was unambiguous, despite its hurried and messy nature. "I am aware of your actions." Anyone who observed the words, which were written with a quivering hand, was seized by apprehension. The most peculiar aspect: the handwriting appeared to be Claire's. However, how could she have composed such a document when she was supposed to be deceased? The message appeared to be a cautionary tale, a hint intended to direct an individual toward the truth. However, it only served to exacerbate the enigma. It did not take long for connections between the victim and the suspects to emerge, with each discovery being more unexpected than the previous one. Claire's involvement in their lives was more extensive than anyone had initially suspected. Alice Dawson finally acknowledged the injuries on her arms that she had been concealing, which were small but evident. Had they originated from Claire? Or was it something more? Had they been involved in the long-buried transgression between the two women? Late-night telephone conversations. The type that did not tally up. Daniel Prescott, the affluent socialite, had been on the phone at unusual hours, his voice clipped and urgent. He had been conversing with an individual whose identity was unknown to all. The murmurs emanating from the other end of the line were difficult to interpret. However, there was a disconcerting quality to the manner in which he would abruptly terminate the call upon the entry of any individual into the room. What was he concealing? And why had Claire been so significant to him? This was followed by the fleeting but frantic conversations between David Lee and Mia Thompson, the secret lovers. Claire's demise occurred mere hours after they were observed together. However, both individuals denied any involvement with her when questioned separately, as their accounts did not quite align. What was the reason for their heightened defensiveness? Was it the remorse of their affair, or was there more to their relationship with Claire than they were willing to acknowledge? And the Fosters, Emily and James, had also been behaving peculiarly. In the weeks preceding Claire's death, the once perfect couple had begun to deteriorate. Emily, who is typically composed and reserved, was observed to be anxious, her eyes averting to the phone whenever it rung. She had been evading her spouse, but their disagreement was not merely a mere argument. Her eyes were filled with a dread that appeared to originate from Claire herself. How much did Claire know about their obsession? The investigation was diverted by each clue, and the closer Detective Alexandra Rhodes came to uncovering the truth, the more the answers seemed to elude her. The components were not compatible. The timeline was inconsistent. There was no explanation for the 17 minutes that were missing. However, the tension in the hotel was only exacerbated by each new detail, which lingered in the air, thick and oppressive, as if everyone was anticipating the walls to close in on them. Was Claire's death the consequence of a solitary individual's betrayal? Or was it a component of a more sophisticated, overarching conspiracy? And if so, what was it that she had discovered that resulted in her tragic demise? The solutions were concealed within the web of half-truths and falsehoods that enveloped these 5 couples. However, as the investigation progressed, it became evident that the truth was significantly more intricate than anyone had anticipated. As the inquiry into Claire Mercer's death progressed, the case assumed a life of its own, veering in unexpected directions. The shadows grew longer with each new piece of evidence, obscuring the truth from those who sought it, and each new lead seemed to open the door to additional inquiries. The further Detective Alexandra Rhodes delved, the more layers of deception she discovered, layers that appeared to belong to all parties involved, but were never quite as they appeared. A torn love letter was discovered in the jacket pocket of Daniel Prescott, a wealthy industrialist who had been one of the first to be questioned about his involvement. This was the first misdirection. The letter was addressed to Claire Mercer, and its edges were jagged, as if they had been ripped in a haste. The words were fervent, resonating with regret and yearning. At first, the situation appeared straightforward, a concealed love affair between 2 individuals who should never have encountered one another. However, there was an uneasiness about it. The message was flawed, and the letter was incomplete. Why would Daniel, a man of such authority and influence, be carrying something so messy? Something that is so evidently emotional? Was this a love missive or a component of a more extensive puzzle? The letter was insufficient to establish the case. However, it clearly illustrated a man who had more to conceal than he had initially disclosed. And then there was Alice Dawson, a woman with a meticulously curated image, until the bruises on her neck were discovered. They were not immediately apparent. However, upon closer examination, they were undeniable. 2 deep purple marks, one located just below her left ear and the other concealed beneath her collar. They seemed fresh, though she had tried to cover them up with a scarf. Alice became defensive when probed. She denied that they were anything more than an accident, possibly the result of a negligent fall or a tight scarf she had been wearing earlier. However, it was difficult to disregard her response when Claire was brought up. The manner in which her visage contracted when the victim's name was mentioned. Was it remorse, or was it something else entirely? Is it possible that the injuries are indicative of a more sinister situation, such as an argument that escalated beyond reason? Another unexpected turn of events was the diary entry. A small, weathered journal was discovered in a compartment of Claire's suitcase, among her possessions. At first, the pages appeared commonplace, containing the typical reflections of a woman preparing for a new chapter in her life. However, the investigators were particularly intrigued by a single entry that was composed mere days prior to her passing. Claire disclosed a clandestine relationship in the text. She refrained from identifying the individual. However, the tone of the entry implied that this was not a mere affair, but rather a more profound relationship that had persisted for several months. The entry suggested that Claire had been secretly seeing one of the suspects. The language was impassioned, but also tinged with frustration. Claire was obviously torn. Who was this person? Was it Daniel, the businessman? Or was it one of the others, possibly James Foster, whose fixation on precision appeared to have become excessive? Is it possible that Claire was portraying multiple characters, or was there a more profound motivation behind her actions? The diary did not provide any answers. Rather, it raised additional inquiries. However, the concealed camera footage that was discovered later was potentially the most significant piece of evidence. A whispered argument was captured in the hallway outside room 237 in the footage, which was captured just minutes before Claire's demise. The voices were too subdued to be audible, but the body language was quite expressive. One individual was evidently agitated, while the other attempted to alleviate their anxiety. Not only was the exchange intense, but it appeared to be a confrontation. The camera, which was situated just beyond the line of sight, had captured the final moments before the situation deteriorated. Who was present in that hallway? Also, what was said during that argument? It was impossible to determine with certainty. However, it was evident that someone had been present, and the tension between them was undeniable. Claire's actions and decisions appeared to be the focal point of the argument. Was it a disagreement between lovers? Or had someone finally had enough of the secrecy and lies? The suspects, who were already under intense scrutiny, began to appear even more culpable as the web of suspicion tightened with each new clue. However, as the days progressed, it became increasingly difficult to differentiate between fact and fiction. Each couple appeared to be concealing something, but what was the reality? Who among them was capable of homicide, and who was merely a victim of circumstance? Was the bruising on Alice's neck merely a manifestation of a shattered relationship, or was there something more sinister at play? Was the torn letter from Daniel merely a misguided confession, or was it indicative of a more profound preoccupation with Claire? Claire's diary. Was it a final warning to an individual who had crossed the line, or was it an attempt to make sense of her own tangled emotions? Then, there was the argument in the entryway. Was it merely a dispute between lovers, a typical altercation between two individuals who were trapped in a moment of frustration? Or did it disclose something more substantial, something that could potentially undermine their preconceived notions regarding the case? The distinction between truth and deception became increasingly muddled as the investigators continued to uncover more information. The five couples' integrity appeared to be under question with each new piece of information, each one more concerning than the previous. However, were these clues intended to guide the investigators in the incorrect direction? Were they intentionally positioned to create diversions that would lead them to believe that the incorrect individual was responsible? Or were they genuine pieces of evidence that, when combined, could uncover the truth about Claire Mercer's horrific murder? As the investigation progressed, it became evident that nothing was as it appeared. Each suspect had a narrative to recount, and each was concealing something. However, were they concealing the truth or merely attempting to safeguard themselves from an offense they had not committed? Detective Alexandra Rhodes discovered that she was delving deeper into the convoluted labyrinth of secrets that encompassed Claire Mercer's death as the investigation progressed. The more she discovered, the more she felt as though the case's walls were closing in on her. The investigation into the lamentable death of a woman, which had begun as a straightforward inquiry, quickly transformed into a complex web of deliberate concealment, half-truths, and unspeakable secrets. Detective Rhodes was compelled to contemplate whether she had been unwittingly entering a trap with each new discovery. Additionally, what if the truth was so thoroughly buried that it would require an extraordinary event to reveal it? A small detail caught Rhodes' attention as she sat alone in her office, reviewing the case files once more, late one night. The lipstick message discovered in room 237, which was previously perplexing, suddenly appeared to be all too familiar. At first, the message, which was a haphazardly scrawled set of words on the mirror, appeared to be random. However, the more Rhodes examined it, the more it evoked an unsolved case from years prior, one that had persisted in her career for an extended period. It appeared that the case had been resolved. A young woman was brutally murdered under circumstances that are strikingly similar. The lipstick message had also been the primary piece of evidence in that case. However, it had never made sense. As she sat in the tranquility of her office, a realization occurred. The two homicides were inextricably linked. The death of Claire Mercer was not an isolated tragedy. It was a component of a much larger, dark, shared secret that had been kept private for years. And someone, somewhere, had been making sure that the truth never came to light. The missing 17 minutes of security footage, long considered a technical error, also took on a new significance. It wasn't just a malfunction. It was a deliberate act, one that had been planned long before the murder took place. Rhodes had consistently harbored suspicions that the footage had been tampered with, However, it was now evident that the cover-up was not a mere accident. More than one individual was involved in the coordinated effort. However, who could have orchestrated it? Who possessed the authority and expertise to manipulate an element that was so critical, one that could either make or destroy the case? The truth was becoming increasingly elusive, and Rhodes' realization that the investigation had been deliberately directed in the wrong direction from the outset was increasing as she connected the dots. And then, there was the matter of Claire's unborn infant. It was a detail that had seemed irrelevant at first, an unfortunate aspect of the tragedy that would have left Claire's family and friends grieving. But as the investigation progressed, it became evident that this child was not merely an innocent life that was tragically cut short. It was a key to the puzzle, possessing the capacity to unravel everything. Rhodes had been cautious about delving too deeply into the baby's paternity, but a breakthrough occurred when a medical report was discovered, which revealed a shocking fact: the child was not fathered by Claire's husband, James Mercer. One of the suspects was identified as the father of the infant. However, which one? And how far back did this concealed relationship extend? The revelation sent shockwaves through the case, as it exposed long-held secrets, betrayals, and grudges that had been simmering beneath the surface, waiting for the appropriate moment to explode. Rhodes had consistently recognized that the solution to the case was concealed in clear sight. She had simply been unaware of the appropriate location to search. The puzzle pieces, which were previously disorganized and dispersed, were now beginning to come together. The lipstick message, the missing footage, and the baby's paternity all indicated that a meticulously orchestrated scheme had been implemented to conceal a lethal secret. However, who was responsible for manipulating the strings? Who was responsible for the creation of this convoluted web of deception? The response was delivered through a confrontation. It was late one evening when Rhodes called all the suspects in for one final round of interrogation. The air was dense with suspicion, and the tension in the room was palpable. Each of them was aware that this was the moment at which everything would either come together or collapse apart. The walls were closing in, and one by one, Rhodes began to apply pressure, asking the difficult questions that compelled each suspect to account for their actions. While some remained steadfast, others began to crumble. Daniel Prescott was the first to crack, his nerves ultimately yielding to the weight of the evidence against him. It was insignificant, a minor oversight, but it sufficed. When queried about the lipstick message, Daniel reacted immediately, his face pale as he stammered for a response. The manner in which he described the situation, his voice trembling and his eyes flitting nervously, provided Rhodes with all the information she required. It wasn't just that he recognized the message, it was that he knew exactly what it meant. Only the murderer would have known that detail. The manner in which he reacted was exclusive to an individual who was implicated in the crime. Rhodes was aware at that precise moment. The truth was ultimately revealed. The meticulous facade, the fabrications, the half-truths, they had all crumbled. The puzzle pieces were ultimately assembled. And the perpetrator? It was one of them, concealed in plain sight, awaiting its exposure. Detective Alexandra Rhodes was aware that the conclusion of this case was imminent as she stood in the dimly lighted interrogation room. The final elements of the puzzle had been arranged, but one critical question remained: who was responsible for the entire operation? Rhodes was edging closer to the truth with each step, despite the fact that the answers were dispersed and entangled in betrayals, lies, and profoundly buried secrets. The suspects, who were previously self-assured, had become weakened by the burden. It was now time to confront the individual who had orchestrated the entire event, the individual who had meticulously constructed the web of deception that resulted in Claire Mercer's tragic demise. Rhodes could sense the weight of all that had transpired prior to entering the room where the final confrontation was scheduled to occur. The security footage, the lipstick message, and the missing minutes all pointed to a single suspect. However, in situations such as this, the truth is seldom as it appears. There was consistently a concealed layer of truth, a turn, or a wrinkle that was just beneath the surface. She had suspected, but she had never fully comprehended the situation until now. James Mercer, Claire's spouse, was the genuine perpetrator of the crime. The individual who had assumed the role of the bereaved widower, the one whom all sympathized with, was the one who had arranged the entire event. He had meticulously crafted a fabrication that would conceal his activities by leveraging his wealth, influence, and capacity to manipulate those in his vicinity. It was not solely about the financial aspect. It was a matter of sustaining a flawless image and exercising control. However, one could no longer conceal the truth. Rhodes had discovered that James Mercer was not merely the victim of a tragic homicide. He was the individual who had arranged for the meticulously timed blackout in the hotel security footage and had engaged a private investigator to stalk Claire. He had planted false evidence, manipulated Claire's closest friends, and concocted a tale of infidelity to conceal his own secret. In the months preceding Claire's death, his rage had intensified as he discovered her adultery and the potential paternity of her unborn child. He had taken matters into his own hands when she decided to leave him. The meticulously executed murder, the lipstick message, and the enigmatic clues were all components of his strategy to divert suspicion and frame someone else. However, his strategy ultimately proved unsuccessful. Rhodes had discerned the deception and discovered the concealed reality. The trial of James Mercer commenced in a crowded courtroom. The public was incredulous. The man who had appeared to be so blameless and so shattered by the death of his wife was now on trial for her murder. He was indicted on charges of conspiracy, first-degree murder, and tampering with evidence. His wealth and prestige were no longer sufficient to shield him from the repercussions of his actions, and his once pristine reputation was shattered. He was left alone, the architect of his own downfall, as the individuals who had previously supported him turned their backs. The other suspects, who were entangled in the web of deception and falsehoods, were each subjected to their own punishment. Several individuals were forced to appear in court to answer for their involvement in the cover-up. Some individuals discovered that their personal lives were in disarray, and their relationships were irreparably damaged. Daniel Prescott, who had succumbed to the pressure, was left to confront the remorse of his involvement. The power-hungry business partners who had covertly betrayed their colleagues were now out of business, their empires crumbling under the weight of their own greed. The city appeared to exhale an exhalation of relief as the dust settled. The case was concluded, the perpetrator was apprehended, and justice had been administered. However, a sense of unease persisted in the air as the courthouse doors closed behind James Mercer, suggesting that this was not the final chapter. There was an incomplete task. A lingering question that no one could shake off was the final element of the puzzle. The Blackwood Hotel, a location that had been the epicenter of the events, continued to exist, its dark corridors, rooms, and secrets awaiting discovery. What other secrets were concealed behind those walls? What additional information was awaiting disclosure? Detective Rhodes was unable to escape the sensation that the Blackwood Hotel still held something more as she walked away from the courthouse. Indeed, the matter was concluded. However, it was evident to her that the mysteries of that hotel had not been satisfactorily resolved. And as she made one final glimpse over her shoulder, the faint echo of whispers seemed to follow her. Was it solely the wind? Or was it something more? Something that would entice her to return to the Blackwood Hotel? The audience was left with unanswered concerns following the final twist. Although the truth had been disclosed, there was still an unsettling sense of incompleteness. The Blackwood Hotel, with its dark secrets and concealed truths, was far from a mere site of tragedy. It was a location where mysteries remained, awaiting the appropriate individual to uncover them. And as Rhodes gazed toward the future, she was aware that this would not be her final visit to the establishment. Is the nightmare truly over, or have the eerie corridors of the Blackwood Hotel claimed yet another victim? Like, subscribe, and hit the bell icon for more deep dives into the world's most chilling mystery cases. Share your thoughts in the comments below.